Hellhounds, chase ghosts, come sleep, watch out, demons are coming, run, sleep, hide, spirits, ghosts, hide, demons, hellhounds, ghosts, demons are coming.
Welcome home, my little hellhounds. Tonight we have 8 scary stories to sink our hellish teeth into. Please, if you like the video, then click that like button and subscribe. Don't forget to click that bell icon so you get notified every time I upload. If you have any scary stories you want narrated on the channel, then please send them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, let's get right into it. Out of the Dark, posted by JankyTank64. My first experience with the supernatural was one of the most terrible life experiences I can remember. It happened when I was young and dumb and wanted to go out into the world and explore. While I was out of my home country of Canada, I witnessed a horror I soon hope to forget. I had gone on a trip with some of my buddies to Montana, just below my home province of Alberta. We were originally going to stay in Yellowstone National Park, but decided to head to Glacier National Park first before camping out at Yellowstone for a few days. We finally reached Glacier Park after a 6-hour drive and had just enough time to do a little hiking before going to our hotel in the nearby town to rest and move on towards Yellowstone. We had gotten to the park around 4:30 p.m. and decided it was a great idea to hike after dark. So we hiked up the trail, looking at the glorious views of rivers and waterfalls of the Avalanche Creek Trail. The light began to fade rather quickly while we were about 2/3 of the way up, and we had hiked into the trail about 10 kilometers. So it would take us about 2 hours to walk back down from that point. This is when shit goes downhill. Myself and my friends were all outdoorsmen and loved to go hiking and travel around the Rocky Mountains, but we were still inexperienced when it came to night hiking, since the trail we were on wasn't as travelled. At this part of the hike, the trail was hard to follow in the dark, although every now and then we would see a sign that notified us that we were going in the right direction. At some point, maybe 1/3 of the way down the mountain, we ended up going off the trail, following a little rabbit trail, thinking we were still on the correct path. We began to figure out that we were definitely not going the right way, as my friend checked his compass, showing we were heading deeper into the Rocky Mountains, miles and miles of forest. Then begins the mass panic. My friends and I immediately turned around and began walking the way we came. But the trail we were following didn't look the same as it had before, leading us to believe even more lost than before. That is when we collectively noticed how quiet it had gotten. No insects, no birds, nothing. It was dead silence. I knew this was a bad sign, as I'm a hunter, and when it gets quiet like this, it means that there is a large predator around and that it is hunting. We had literally become prey to some unknown beast in the woods. We all began getting a sudden spike of anxiety when I let the guys know what was up. That's when we hear it. A noise that brought terror, a guttural howl from up the mountain. It was then followed by many more. My heart went into my throat, and the terror I felt made me shake. Most of my friends did the same, all but two. The others had already dipped and had began running in the direction opposite the howls. We all followed soon after, running ourselves ragged, until we looked behind and saw the eye shine of something that was much larger than we had anticipated. The eyes were at least 6 feet off the ground and moving towards us fast. That is when we split up, running in random directions, hoping to lose these beasts. It was never going to happen. I could hear the breath of one of these things about 20 feet behind me and gaining. All of a sudden, my friend appears from the trees to my right, and we end up running together until I cut off from him, hoping to escape. I know I left him to die that night, but it was a last-ditch effort that worked out to my advantage. I heard his screams from my left and ran as fast as I could away from them, with tears rolling down my face as I hear his screams for help and him shrieking in pain, then nothing, as if he never existed. I continue running down the mountain until I see a familiar sight ahead of me. It was one of the trail signs, showing how far you were on the trail. I stopped, checked where I was and started running again, hoping to get away from the creatures on the mountain. Another kilometer down the trail, I began hearing howls, getting closer and closer by the moment, causing me to run even harder, looking ahead to see the sign saying parking lot and zoom past it in my panic, looking for the keys in my pocket and scrambling towards the only vehicle still left in the parking lot, which was my car. I used my fob to unlock my car from a distance and run as hard as I can towards it, slamming into the side of my door and open it, hopping in and starting the car. I look out of my window towards the trail entrance and see two pairs of eyes staring at me from just out of the range of the lampposts. They stare at me before disappearing back into the brush. As I drive away, never looking back, I arrived at the ranger station by the park entrance and ran inside looking dishevelled and terrified. I began telling the ranger at the desk what had just happened. He then looked at me with a sad face, as if he knew something like this would happen, and called up the search and rescue team to come in the morning to look for them. They were never found. The New Girl at School, posted by agigante02. The rain pelted my back as I hurriedly walked up to my school. Thunder clapped in the distance as I finally walked into the vestibule with the lights flickering. Chatter filled the halls as I made my way towards my locker. My name is Jackson. I'm a sophomore at Ridgewood High School. My school isn't huge, but it isn't small either. Everyone knows each other, but we're not all friends, if that makes any sense. I noticed a short girl at the locker next to mine. That locker had always been empty. A new student, perhaps, or did someone's locker get switched? As I got closer, I realised that I have never seen this girl before. She was short and thin, with long tangled hair cascading down her back. She wore a chestnut brown oversized hoodie, black leggings and black boots. "Hi, are you new here? I don't think we've met before," I said with a smile. "Yeah, my name is Beverly," she said while trying to open her locker. Her fingernails, caked in dirt, had caught my attention, but I kept my thoughts to myself, as I knew better than to comment on looks. "Do you know where room 203 is?" she asked. "Yes, actually, that's where I was about to head. Biology, first period with Mr. Grant." She nodded her head slowly. I took a better look at her. Her face was fully covered up in makeup. Her hazel eyes had a yellowish tint to them and her lips were extremely chapped. Perhaps she comes from a poor family. I showed her the way to our class of the day and we discussed her schedule, which to my amazement was very similar to mine. As we took our seats, class began at the sound of the bell. Almost halfway through the period, I had noticed something. Beverly seemed to have not been acknowledged by anyone but me this entire time. Even the teachers had not seemed to notice her existence. Maybe I was just looking into it too deeply, but something felt off. Must be the weather, I suppose. Beverly and I shared the same lunch period, so I offered to sit with her at lunch, to which she accepted. I wasn't popular at school, but I wasn't a nobody either. I knew people and people knew me. I didn't really have any friends either, as the ones I did have either had different lunch periods or weren't in school today. "If you don't mind me asking, where do you live?" I asked as I took a bite of my ham sandwich. She took a second to respond, but eventually replied, "I live at the corner of Maple and Greenstone." I tried to think of that area, but I wasn't too familiar with streets north of the school. We had a project for English, and we had decided to be partners. "Did you want to come to my place to work on the project after school? I live right down the road." "I can't," she said quickly and looked away. "Could we go to a park, maybe?" Her response confused me, but I agreed, and our plans were made. The bell rang at 2 o'clock, and she followed me out the doors in the drizzling rain. "Are you sure you don't want to come to my place, or even go to your place? It's a bit wet outside," I asked. "No, we agreed on the park," Beverly said firmly. For winter in New York, the weather was fairly comfortable at 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The park benches squeaked as we both sat down. I put down my sweatshirt on top of the table to prevent our papers from getting wet. I looked over to Beverly and saw her covering up her face with even more makeup. "You know, you don't need that much makeup," I joked. She stared at me with narrowed eyes and continued applying a skin-coloured liquid to her face. Eventually we got to work on our project. It consisted of me doing all the work while she fidgeted and stared off into space. It didn't bother me much because I was used to always doing all the work for group projects, but I was hoping to get to know more about her. Before I knew it, the little bit of sun that was out had set, leaving us, or rather myself, working under the light of a dim street light. "I think this is good for today," I said while packing my notebooks into my backpack. She nodded her head and picked up her worn-out backpack. It caught my attention that she didn't even have any books or anything in her bag at all. I get it, first day at school and all, but she didn't eat or drink anything while with me the majority of the day either. "I can walk you home if you'd like," I smiled. "No, you can't," she said with a stern look on her face. "Are you sure? It's dark out and I want to make sure you get home okay." "No, I'll walk home by myself." I assumed she was just being safe, considering she barely knew me and just met me today. Fair enough, I suppose. I'm practically a stranger to her. We said our goodbyes and headed in opposite directions. As I began walking, curiosity had gotten the best of me. I wanted to know where she lived, but also wanted to make sure she got home safe, since there has been an increase in crime in the area lately. I kept my distance from her and followed her for about 15 minutes, taking multiple turns through an area I was completely unfamiliar with. I checked my phone and luckily I had enough battery to use the map app to find my way home. Wait, Beverly didn't use her phone today. I never saw her with one, and it didn't seem like she brought it with her. Maybe her family couldn't afford one. Still, even now in 2021, it was odd for one not to have some type of smartphone. Maybe I never saw her use it. Beverly started running and that caught my attention. I picked up the pace while also keeping my footsteps light so she wouldn't hear me. She slowed down under a street lamp and looked around with her watchful eyes. I ducked behind a tree so she couldn't catch me. I took this time to take in the area around me. Right in front of where she stood was a cemetery I had never seen in my 16 years of life. She quickly hopped the fence and made her way down the dirt path. I followed her, being sure to avoid sticks and puddles that may make sound. I had accidentally lost track of her in the darkness. Surprisingly, there were no lights in the cemetery at all, which made it even more spooky. Just then I saw a figure kneeling down in front of a grave, digging in the dirt. What the I whispered to myself. As I got closer, the figure was no longer there. Was my mind playing tricks on me? Where had Beverly gone? I was curious as to what the figure was doing in front of that grave, so I slowly made my way towards it. It was a fairly normal grave, Mother Nature had weathered down the gravestone a bit, and vines cuddled it. The dirt appeared completely untouched, which had made me feel even more uneasy than I already was. My heart nearly stopped as I read the name engraved on the stone. Our beloved daughter, Beverly M. Keating, 2005, 2021. You are always in our hearts and thoughts. You were taken from us far too soon. We love you always. I took a step back, almost tripping on a gravestone behind me. My eyes caught a glimpse of a picture nestled in the dirt in front of the grave. It was a picture of an older man, woman, and a young girl and a baby boy. The young girl looked like a younger version of Beverly. I couldn't believe what I was seeing right now. This must be a dream. Beverly spent almost the whole day with me. She talked to me. Beverly, I called out into the night. Only the crickets and the whistling of the wind responded. The air got even colder, so I turned to head home. Just as I turned around, a faint whisper came from behind me. I told you not to take me home. Finally sharing my experience. Posted by Bananarama16. This took place a few years ago. I was in my late teens, driving home at 10 p.m. This was a typical shift for me, and I wasn't too tired. I know what I saw. I lived somewhere out in the country, far enough to be on septic, close enough to be on the county's water system. It wasn't irregular to see wildlife at night: elk, deer, barn cats, even occasionally dogs. I'd been living here for a few years at this point. During this specific time, one particular neighbour had a really bad habit of his dog running free on the side of the road. I love animals, so I would always pull over, call the number on his collar, and get him back to his owner. Anyways, I'm driving home, nearly 1 block and 3 turns from my house. I see this figure out of the corner of my eye. It looks like a medium-sized dog. I roll down my window, turn my music down, and start calling out to it as I would a dog. Hey sweetie, come here baby. It seemed very shy, as it wouldn't look at me, and its body language was very timid. I kept trying to speak sweetly to it, to let it know I wasn't a threat. It looked a little skinny, seemed to have short grey hair. I really wanted to see if I could help it, maybe find its owner, or get it somewhere safe and fed. It finally responds to my sweet talk and turns to face me. My stomach dropped. This is going to sound crazy, but it had a human face. The best way I could describe it is like a Teletubby. I really wish there was another way to describe it for the sake of my credibility. It had no distinctive features, and its head was still shaped like a dog. It didn't make any faces, any noises, and it didn't speak either. I was so surprised that I screamed, "What the fuck?" and sped off. I was so scared too, because my house had a gate that I had to open, and I didn't know if it was following me or anything. I didn't look back, and it didn't appear to chase after me as I was speeding off. I feel bad about it to this day. I wish I didn't react the way I did, but I didn't know if I was in danger. Seeing something like that, something you can't explain, I don't know, but I really can't stress enough how it did not make any facial expressions, noises, speech, or anything. I was the one going out of my way to bug it, and I was, bluntly, a dick to it. I haven't seen it since. I wish I could change how I reacted, and I really wonder about it all of the time. I did some internet scavenging afterwards, and I haven't been able to find any experiences like it, which really make me feel nuts. Maybe it was something slightly different than a skinwalker, but this is the closest law that I know of. Never play with a Ouija board. Posted by Celluloid Addiction. This story happened in October 2004, back when I was still a third year high school student. My friends and I stuck around the school late at night after our annual Halloween party. We had agreed to try out my friend's Ouija board. It wasn't the brightest idea, but we needed a thrill. We found a nice spot under a huge narrow tree and proceeded with our half-assed ritual. There were 5 of us, 2 boys and 3 girls. We were all expecting some kind of paranormal contact. Rumours had it our school was haunted, but we've never really experienced anything firsthand, and it was Halloween when all the spirits came out to play. We all wanted to get spooked. Also, we've never seen a Ouija board firsthand before, so we were pretty excited. Our school was an old Spanish colonial house built in the 1800s when the Spaniards still occupied the Philippines. We were in a section of the school that doesn't get used often, located beside a creepy old Jesuit house. People only go there when they needed to use the restroom, store equipment on one of the sheds, or make out with their boyfriends or girlfriends. We sat down in the middle of an open space, with only an exposed bare bulb nearby illuminating the surroundings. We were all having a laugh, scaring each other with what if scenarios. It was your typical dumb kids doing dumb things. My friend who bought the Ouija board proceeded to place it in the middle of our circle. If I remember correctly, it was the glow-in-the-dark version, which we found hilarious, but it gave us the ability to see what was written in the dark. Not knowing what to do and going after what we've seen in the movies, we all proceeded to place our index finger on top of the planchette. We sat there looking at each other until one of us said, "What's next?" We didn't know if there was a proper way to start the ritual, Plus, the board didn't come with instructions, so we decided to just throw in a question. "Is anyone there?" I called out into the darkness. "If there are spirits living here, please talk to us," one of the girls joined in. We clearly had no idea what we were doing. Still nothing. Not even the slightest bit of wind. One of my friends jerked the planchette, and the girl who brought the Ouija board screamed, breaking the silence. We all laughed at how ridiculous it was. After a bit of joking around, we decided to give it another go. We all placed our index fingers on the planchette once more and asked, "If there's anyone there, we would like to make contact." "Don't break the circle," one of my friends jokingly said. "Shut up," I whispered. We were just about ready to give up when the wind started to pick up. The stillness broke, and the darkness around us seemed to move. Just a coincidence, we thought. "Okay, don't break the circle," I yelled out. "Is anyone there?" I was excited. It was like a scene from a movie, with dirt and dead leaves swirling around us. "Guys, I'm scared," my friend sitting beside me said. "My mum warned me about playing with forces we don't know." "Did you die here?" "Were you killed during the war?" "Are you the headless priest that roams these halls?" "Do you know Jose Rizal, our national hero?" "Are you a hottie?" my friend giggled. At this point, we were all throwing random stupid questions. "Nothing. This is bullshit." "I don't want to do this anymore," my friend said, exacerbated. We were all thinking the same. Just then, a group of dogs from the neighbouring house started barking at us through the chain link fence. These 6 dogs were growling and showing teeth. We all screamed, and without finishing the ritual, bolted right out of there. We didn't see each other until after Halloween break, and this is where the story gets creepy. One of the girls told us about a weird experience she had the night after playing with the Ouija board. She had gotten home late after hanging out with her friends from the neighbourhood, when she realised she forgot the keys to her house. So she called her brother up, who was then still sharing a room with her, and what he said crept the hell out of her. He swore she was already home. He claimed to have seen her walk in a while ago, and that she looked really tired, and saw her head straight to bed. Creepy. But no need to freak ourselves out, we thought. Besides, her brother must have been just tired and seeing things. But then my other friend started telling us about an encounter she had that Halloween night. She was going up to her room when the lights started flickering as she was ascending the staircase. Your typical horror movie visuals. Shrug it off to faulty wiring. But just then, she saw the door to her room open, and a dark figure stepped out and stood atop of their staircase. She couldn't make out the entity's face, but she recounted that she couldn't move and felt utter dread as the figure stared down at her. "No way," my best friend who just joined in the conversation, said in disbelief, "Something happened to me as well." He recalled that he was sleeping one night when he woke up feeling really uncomfortable. He described his vision as having TV-like static and a feeling of heaviness surrounding him. He looked around the room, and that's when he saw a bloody, charred face with piercing red eyes grinning at him through the window. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had almost run in with death that night. After the ritual, I was sleeping in our sedan on the way home after fooling around with the Ouija board. When I felt our car jerk, I woke up instantly. Looking out the window, I found out that we've been hit by a huge oil tanker. I panicked and leapt out of the car. Luckily, my mum and I survived the crash, since the front of the car was a total wreck. I still don't have an explanation why those things happened to us, but thank God nothing happened after that. I never played or gotten near a Ouija board ever since. A visit from Slender Man, posted by Thor Hurricane. I live with my parents and my younger sister of 17 at the time in a nice residential condo up in the hills. One day after work, while I was arriving at my house, there was a strong windstorm going on. It was so strong that some trees fell off, and the streets were full of leaves and pine needles. When I arrived home, there were so many pine needles piled up in front of my house that I had to be careful not to trip. At the other side of the street, there is an empty lot with nothing built in it, and a wall that divides my residential from another that is next to it. While I was looking to all of the pine needles piled up, I realized that although I got neighbors at both sides of my house, the leaves and needles were only piled up in front of my house. I knew that no one had cleaned up their part of the street because it was still winding hard when I was arriving home. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the winding stopped and the air seemed still for a bit. It was starting to get dark out, but the lighting around my house seemed strange. That's when I felt as if someone was watching me. I started to feel sick and dizzy and started seeing fireworks around my vision. That type you see when you are going to pass out. I've overcome some hardships in my life, and I was relatively strong-willed, so I held myself against my car and stumbled to my house door, almost passing out. Once inside my house, I laid on the floor trying to recompose myself, as I have high blood pressure since I was 16. I didn't think much about this. After several minutes staring at my door from the inside, I got up, locked the door, and went on with the night. Hours later, I was playing League of Legends with my sister, as I'm addicted to it, when I noticed some movement in the empty terrain in front of my house. it has just a fell of trees, but in the dark you can't see very far. That's when, with letting out a gasp, I saw him, a tall, white figure with no eyes or facial features. He was wearing some form of a black blazer, and there were shadows creeping from behind him. I turned to look at my sister and called her, but when I looked back to the terrain, it was empty. I shrugged it off and asked her if she would care to sleep in my room that day, and she said okay. 1 week went on, giving me a feeling of dread every time I was around my house, but outside of it, when I arrived home in one of these days, it was strangely still, while the other days at the time it was usually dark. Whilst getting my things out of my car, I turned to look to the empty terrain when I noticed a woman screaming, "Go away!" and closing her windows fiercely. Her house was in the other residential condo to the other side of the wall where the empty lot is. I was startled for a moment and went straight to my house. I've never said anything about it to anyone, but the next day my sister came to me worried, saying that she had a nightmare where I was going crazy because I could see Slender Man. That gave me chills across my spine and I felt dizzy again. I started explaining the last events to her, and she laughed and said that there is no such thing as Slender Man, and that I must be forgetting to take my blood pressure medicine, which I sometimes forget to take, but I knew that wasn't the case. The next week I had forgotten all about it. While arriving home, I opened the door to my house and a huge rodent entered my house running. It was probably 60 centimeters from head to tail and went on to the kitchen. This rodent lives in the woods near my home, and due to ambient laws, we can't kill it or send it anywhere else. I was chasing it off of my house when he jumped to a metal table we have and started gnarling at me. I screamed at him, which made him pissed off, and I swear he was about to jump at me when he stopped, looked behind me and started to piss himself. Feeling something strange behind me, I turned to look only to find nothing between me and the door behind me. The rat jumped off the table, fell awkwardly into the floor and fled through a door that takes you outside in the back of my home. My sister was startled by the whole ordeal and asked me what the hell happened. When I explained, I told her that I've seen that rodent before and it had never gotten so close to me before. He was always afraid of me. I asked my sister what she thought about it, and she said maybe there was something more frightening than you outside. That night I had trouble sleeping, and when I did fall asleep, I dreamed of him, this tall figure lurking at the forest into my home. In my dreams, my home shone light into him, making him fled to the woods. Since that dream, I've never felt his presence again, but sometimes I wonder what made him go away, and why did he came to my house. My Hat Man Encounter, posted by Tuck Jess 40. I was invited here by an admin. So first of all, thank you. I have so many experiences to share with everyone, nearly 38 years worth to be exact. So without further ado, here is one of the very first paranormal experiences that I can remember. Enjoy. This happened one holiday weekend, the Saturday night before Easter. I was a 5-year-old little girl living in a tiny 2-bed apartment with my mom, single at the time, and my brother, 10 years older. I was sleeping on the bottom bunk of the beds my brother and I shared. I was alone in the room since my brother was staying with his father for the holidays. I wake up and have to use the toilet. I go and do my business and wash my hands like a good big girl does. I loved being independent and doing things for myself like any normal child at that age. Everything is normal until I walk back into my room. I see someone standing in the corner. I didn't blink, move, or even breathe. I just froze in such fear I couldn't think. This wasn't just a burglar or something. This figure was standing in the dark corner of my room. It looks like a man, only he is made out of a complete shadow, like darker than the darkest black. I can make out the outline of his body shape and what looked like a trench coat and a top hat. The clothes were also all shadow-like, like his body. No features on the face, like there is a ski mask over it, without the eye mouth holes. This isn't the scariest part though. What happened next has been ingrained in my memory so badly that I still recall even the smallest details of the experience. The figure raises one of his arms and points one long finger towards my bed. I had been standing next to it the entire time, having stopped to stare at the figure. Like most children, I had a favourite kiddie blanket that went everywhere with me. Mine was a Sesame Street blanket with a picture of Big Bird and Cookie Monster on it. This blanket, of course, was on my bed. When I turn to look what the figure is pointing at, I see that my blanket sort of melts. Then it morphs into thousands and thousands of bugs, spiders, cockroaches, centipedes, all the creepy crawly things you can imagine. They swarm and cover everything. Next thing I know, my mom is shaking me and I'm screaming and crying like I'm being murdered. All is back to normal and the figure is gone. The entire day after, I refused to allow my mom to take me off her hip. She had to carry me around like that for all of that Easter Sunday. I even refused to go hunting for Easter eggs with my cousins, and that is something I always enjoyed doing. Mom tells this story to family members every Easter holiday now, only she says I had a nightmare and woke up screaming about bugs. I know that isn't true. I know I was fully awake, and I have never forgotten it. The paranormal is real. I lived in a haunted house for over a decade. Posted by Linear Equalist. When I was 8 years old, my family moved into the house I grew up in. It wasn't an old house, and no one had died in it, and it didn't even feel creepy. Just an average suburban house in your average southern suburbs. The way the house was set up, when you came in the front door, there was a hallway with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom to the right, the large living room in front of you, with a half wall separating it from the dining room to the left, and the kitchen on the other side of the dining room, where the kitchen and the living room met. There was another small hallway and the master bedroom, a bedroom that was used as an office, and a bathroom, and then breakfast nook leading to a laundry and utility area at the end of the kitchen. My room was to the right of the front door and down the hallway past the bathroom, with the other bedroom on this hallway used for storage mostly. As I was my mother's only child, and my half-brother and sister didn't live with us and rarely came to visit. The first time anything really happened in the house, I was about 9 and I had lost my last tooth. Still being a kid, of course, the tooth fairy was expected. So when I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a figure standing in the middle of my room, I assumed it was the tooth fairy. It was bald and only about 3 or 4 feet tall, about the size of an average child, standing completely still in the middle of my room. I remember my parents telling me that if I was awake, the tooth fairy wouldn't leave me any money, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. When I got up the next morning, I excitedly told my parents that I'd seen the tooth fairy the night before. I described what I'd seen, but they told me it was just a dream. For the next several years after that, I continued seeing and hearing minor things in the house. When I was home alone, cabinet doors would open and close. I'd hear dishes being moved around in the kitchen, or catch movement out of the corner of my eye. The most common was, often at night, I'd wake up to see a young woman hovering over my bed. She was dressed like the Rosie the Riveter character from the old posters from the 1940s, with the red and white bandana around her hair and a denim shirt. When I would see her, she'd stare at me for a few minutes and then slowly float over my body and out through the wall behind me. I was never afraid of her though. When I was about 12, my parents divorced and it was just me and my mother living in the house. By the time I was in my late teens, my mother was rarely home and my house became the hangout for me and my friends. Most nights everyone gathering together to play Dungeons and Dragons or something similar after work. One night we were hanging out but didn't want to play, so I pulled out a Ouija board I'd picked up at the local toy store a few weeks before. Wanting to try it out, we sat in my room to play with the lights out and the door closed, and it went pretty normally. Nothing crazy happened for the most part. The only strange thing that happened was at one point we asked something like, "Show yourself," and at that point we heard the front door open and close and heavy footsteps come down the hall towards my room. The handle of my door started to turn and one of the guys jumped up and locked the door before it could open. We didn't hear anything else, no footsteps moving away from the door or anything, and after a little while we turned on the light and opened the door to see if my mother had come home unexpectedly. The house was empty and the front door locked. We decided we'd had enough of the game at that point, put it up, and everyone went home. A few weeks later we were hanging out at my house again, this time playing Dungeons and Dragons, though one of the girls that usually came had to work late and had classes in the morning, so she'd said she wouldn't be coming. While we were sitting in the living room to play at around 2 in the morning, suddenly we heard footsteps run across my wooden front porch. It sounded like someone very short or a small child running quickly. Everyone in the room heard it, and we had a conversation as to if our friend had changed her mind and had just arrived, as she was very short, and it made more sense than a child running through the neighbourhood at that time of night. When she never came into the house, we all got up to look around, and there was no one outside, and her car wasn't in the yard. Her boyfriend, who was with us, gave her a call and verified that it wasn't her, as she just arrived home on the other side of town and was headed to bed. Around this time, the activity in the house picked up. I saw shadow figures with red eyes, often in the living and dining room areas of the house, footsteps and other noises at all hours of the day or night. I started waking up in my room to see hooded figures standing near my window and door. It was around this time my half-brother, who I was close to, passed away. It was sudden, and I hadn't seen him in years, and he'd gotten into drugs, and my mother had decided to keep me away from him because she didn't want him to be a bad influence on me. After that, I'd wake up hearing his voice saying my name in the middle of the night. On a whim, one night I sat down and typed out a letter to him on my computer that was in my bedroom, since I was home alone that night and was bored. Now this computer was hooked up to an old dot matrix printer, one of the really loud kind that makes all kinds of racket when it's running. After I wrote the letter, I felt silly for it and deleted it without saving or printing it out, and shut down the computer before I went to bed. Around 3 in the morning I woke up and my bed was soaking wet. At first I thought my puppy had peed on the bed because he was too small to get down, even though he was housebroken and I'd taken him out just before bed. I got up to let him outside and change my bed sheets when I realised the wet was just water, and it was more than a tiny puppy could have made. On my way to take my blankets to the laundry room, I passed the bathroom in my hallway and noticed the light was on, even though I'd turned off all the lights before bed. There, sitting on the counter, was a picture from the kitchen, with the inside still wet. When I was really young, my brother used to wake my sister and I up by throwing water on us because it made me laugh. When I got back into my room and started making my bed, I noticed a piece of paper laying on top of my printer. It was the letter that I had written to him and never saved or printed. The computer was still shut down and the printer was off, but it had been printed out, torn off the printer and laid on top of it as if someone had read it. The normal things like this continued for a few years when I lived there off and on before turning dark. Shortly before I moved out of the house for good, the hooded figures appeared more often. I woke up one night with the feeling that I was being stared at, only to roll over and see what looked like a rotting corpse a few inches from my face, and one night woke up to a hooded man standing at the foot of my bed with my bedroom door open when it had been closed before. He held up his hand and a ball of blue light appeared in his palm, which he threw at my face. He and the ball disappeared just before it hit me, but the room was so cold that I could see my breath on a normally hot southern summer night. When I was in my early 20s, after I moved out for good, I had one last experience in the house. My mother hadn't been to the house in months and was preparing to sell it. I told her, one of my cousins, about the things that had happened there through the years, and he decided that one night, out of boredom, he and a friend of his would pick me up to go ghost hunting in the house while it was empty. We each had a camera and he had a voice recorder that we brought. We set the recorder in my old bedroom and spent an hour or two wandering around the house, taking pictures. When we got done, we came back to my room and sat to listen to the recording and discuss all of the nothing that we'd found. On the recording we could hear our voices moving from room to room and talking about how my cousin's friend's camera had a sexy shutter sound, and the fact that my camera stopped working almost as soon as we walked in the door. About 20 minutes into the recording, when we could hear all three of our voices echoing from the other side of the house, a deep voice that sounded like it was right up against the microphone on the recording spoke, "Get the fuck out." We immediately obliged. I found out a few years later that my mum actually had several experiences in that house, with waking up to find an older man in his 50s or 60s looking through her closet, or seeing him just wandering around the house. When she'd say anything or get his attention, he'd turn around and look at her and then vanish. She always thought she was just dreaming or something, but with everything I saw over the years at that house, I can't help but think it was something else. This happened at exactly 12 AM Eastern Standard Time. I am terrified. Creative name by me. This is a repost of mine from Glitch in the Matrix. 12 AM. I was on a call with my friend on Discord, watching them show off their new character in a game to me. It's 12 AM exactly, so my volume was very low. Normal so far, yeah? 12:01 AM, I heard my mother call my name. She called my name from the kitchen, which is downstairs, but she's supposed to be asleep in her room. I take a look around the corner since our rooms are right next to each other, and she is, in fact, asleep in her room. I freaked out, shut my door, sat on my bed and continued to talk to my friend. 12:01 AM still. This happened within 30 seconds. I hear her call me again. I'm sure she called my name. It sounds like her. It sounds like my name. 2 seconds pass. She calls my name once more from the kitchen. This is undoubtedly her voice. I got up to go look again. This time I go halfway down the steps. Something feels wrong. 12:02 a.m. Why would the TV be on? Maybe that's what I heard. I peek down the steps and look. The TV is off. I quietly run back upstairs when I start to feel adrenaline. I'm full of fear and adrenaline as I once again close my door silently and hop back into bed. It's 12:24 a.m. EST. What do I do? What was that? I'm very atheist, for the record, so surely it wasn't my brain making up some religious demon or something. I don't believe in them, and I'm sure of it. I'm not just in denial. What was that? Maybe it wasn't religious. I'm panicking. Edit. 11:05 p.m. the next night. Nothing so far has happened, and I'm awaiting 12 a.m. tonight. Also, to clarify, since I've gotten a lot of comments about this, I meant I'm atheist, as in my brain won't fabricate anything religious, being that I am 100% not religious. Also, not to be rude, but I didn't want many comments saying turn to God. His arms are wide open. As much as I appreciate the support, I am simply a non-believer. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Thanks for listening, and if you like scary stories like these, then please subscribe and submit your stories to Reddit r/homeofscares, and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.